If you haven't been convinced a collapse is coming, then please stay tuned for this episode because we have a doozy of a video today. We've got updated mortgage delinquency data. We've got an update on inflation from the BLS. We're going to briefly look at initial unemployment claims, and we've got more layoffs to report from major companies like Chevron, Six Flags, Warner Media. Another major restaurant chain is also filing for bankruptcy and shutting down 185 stores nationwide. So let's get into it. Black Knight Inc., they put out the latest mortgage performance statistics. And this data includes the entirety of August. And so here's what we know. Mortgage delinquency rate is 6.88%. And that's double from what it was last year. That means 3.87 million homes are delinquent right now. Foreclosure starts, however, is down 40%. So foreclosures are down because of the illness, but once all the protections from foreclosures are taken out, we could see foreclosures triple from here, just to keep pace with the delinquency rate. Now, the delinquency rate only looks at loans past due 30 days or more. A lot of them could catch up, but just saying they are a potential foreclosure risk in the future. And the 5 worst states with regards to their delinquency rate is Mississippi, 11.7%, Louisiana, 11.3%, Hawaii, 9.6%, New York, 9.4%, Florida, 9.1%. And the 5 best states are Colorado, 4.7, Oregon 4.7, Montana 4.6, Washington 4.5, and Idaho at 3.8%. And even though these are the best states, the year-over-year change was still over 80% in each of them, more than double in 3 of them. And think about it, a 5% delinquency rate is 1 out of 20. That means your street will likely have a couple of delinquencies, even in the best of states. But here's where the depressing news starts. What if we looked at the 90-plus day delinquency rate? The 5 worst states are Mississippi, Louisiana, Alaska, Nevada, and Hawaii, and they're each between 6 and 7%. The year-over-year change is double for Mississippi, 2.5 times higher for Louisiana, but 8 to 9 times bigger in Alaska, Nevada, and Hawaii. That means there are 8 to 9 times more long-term delinquent homes in these states than there were last year. The states that are struggling the most these past 6 months: Nevada, Alaska, California, Colorado, and Hawaii. Because banks are not able to foreclose on properties right now, houses that would ordinarily hit the market are not. That is keeping supply down. What happens when supply goes down? Well, prices rise. Worse, the Federal Reserve has insisted that they are going to keep interest rates at 0 until 2024. That encourages investors to pile into the market. Don't be fooled into thinking that 0% interest rates are good. It may help certain sectors like construction, lending, etc., but for the little guy trying to buy his or her first home or rent a place, are finding it extremely expensive because they have to compete with wealthy investors buying everything up. Hurts renters as well. These investors are looking to get a bang for their buck by renting these out. That said, what happens when all these houses are allowed to hit the market? Investors will only step in so much. Once it is obvious that there are not enough people out there with high enough paying jobs to afford the absurd rents they are asking, they will stop buying. Then the whole house of cards is going to collapse. Even more depressing news is what is happening to hotel and real estate. The delinquency rate of hotels is 17%. Retail is 11%. That means 1 out of every 6 hotels are delinquent. And 1 out of 9 retail spaces are delinquent. Look around. What if 1 out of 9 retailers around you were empty? We saw Hawaii as being one of the worst delinquency rate states. Here's an example. The new Otani Kainana Beach Hotel reported 110 layoffs this month. This sale was due to it being liquidated, likely because they cannot afford to pay their debts. Nevada was also hard hit, and here's another example. Nugget Casino Resort is laying off 150 employees. Here's a small story out of Kansas that I'd like to take a look at. The iconic Brookville Hotel is closing its doors. Here's a quote from the owner. "We hung on as long as we could, but the writing was on the wall. We would like to thank everyone for your patronage of the Brookville Hotel over the last 125 years." And an old excerpt of what he said in 2018. "Keeping our business as simple as possible with one menu so people can actually expect the same flavors each time they come here. We're talking generations now." So, they've been around for generations and they haven't been able to succeed. I think this symbolizes the current downtrend in a variety of ways. Mom and pop restaurants are struggling to survive, including businesses that have been around for generations. It also is clear that businesses are trying to stay afloat as long as they can. This couple saw the writing on the wall, but think about how many business owners out there that are still hanging on to hope. Retailers are waiting out Christmas. Restaurants are waiting for customers to come back. Hotels are hoping that restrictions go away. The problem is, even if things did go back to, let's say, 90% of what they were, so many of these businesses are delinquent and would still have an incredibly hard time catching up. Let's take a look at the inflation data from the BLS. There was little change this month from last month except for one category. And leading the charge this month was cars and truck. Well, at least used ones. They've jumped 6% from last month alone. We can only speculate at this point about what this means. My guess is that there's less demand for new cars or even taking out loans for new cars. And that demand is being pushed towards used automobiles, leading to higher prices. That's just speculation on my part. As compared to 1 year ago, used cars and trucks are now up 10.3%. Food at home is up 4.1%. We saw that in an earlier video. The article reads, despite the September decline, the food at home index increased 4.1% over the last 12 months. All 6 major grocery store food groups indexes rose over that span, with increases ranging from 2.6%, which is cereals and bakery products, to 6.3%, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. The index for food away from home rose 3.8% over the last year. The index for limited service meals increased 5.5%, and the index for full service meals rose 2.8%. Now, it's interesting that it's the proteins that are up 6.3%, while the carbs are up 2.6%. For those of you who are trying to eat less carbs or do keto, food prices have gone up a ton for you. Initial jobless claims for unemployment has come down this week. We are now at 840,000 claims for the week ending on October 3rd. But before we start doing cartwheels on the street, just remember this is still near 1 million people losing their jobs and filing for unemployment every week. This number is way too large to be rejoicing. Also, let's zoom out on the chart and see where we are in context of our last recession. We are still higher than the worst week of the 2008 crisis. So we are not out of the woods yet. Federal Reserve-induced inflation causing us to go broke. We are in a world of hurt coming up, and nobody in the mainstream media knows what's going on or is willing to report on it. Before I report on the layoffs this week, please be sure to like this content and subscribe for future updates. Here is Chevron laying off 700 employees in downtown Houston. Nearly 700 employees in Houston will be laid off starting October 23rd, according to a notice Chevron sent to the state of Texas. The layoffs will affect workers at Chevron's downtown offices. In total, the company announced plans to lay off 6,000 workers globally this year. Shell revealed plans to lay off 9,000 workers over the next 2 years, while BP announced plans to cut up to 10,000 jobs. Exxon is reviewing its layoffs. So we've got tons of layoffs coming in the oil sector. Joining Disney and Universal, we've got Six Flags laying off 10% of its full-time employees. Warner Media is planning another round of layoffs. Here's a quote: "Like the rest of the entertainment industry, we have not been immune to the significant impact of the pandemic. We are in the midst of that process, and it will involve increased investments in priority areas and unfortunately reductions in others." In one of my past videos, we talked about PF Chang's struggling. Now here we've got Ruby Tuesday filing for bankruptcy. They're going to be closing down 185 locations. The company filed for bankruptcy in Delaware with estimated debts of between $100 million and $500 million. Company officials said the filing is part of an overall effort to better prepare the restaurant chain for a stronger financial future. See, here we've got another company filing for bankruptcy because of debt. All of these companies were encouraged to take on tons of debt by such low interest rates. The Federal Reserve has created this debt-driven economy into the gutter, because now these companies cannot survive even a few months without customers because they can't service their debt. And what ends up happening? They file for bankruptcy, but worse than that is all the employees that work for this company are now going to be losing their jobs. They were doing a good job. They could have been working, right? But the Federal Reserve is out there encouraging everyone to take on debt. These companies do exactly that, and now look what happens. We're having a ton of layoffs in all of these industries. We have it in AMC, we have it in Regal, we've got it at PF Chang's, Ruby Tuesday. I mean, it's going on and on. If you're wondering why it's incredibly hard to find out about layoffs and what companies are laying off, it's because the Bureau of Labor Statistics at one point used to have a program where they collected reports on mass layoffs that had at least 50 initial claims, and they reported it. So isn't that convenient? They used budget cuts as a reason to cut the mass layoff statistics program, right? Because that's just going to make things look bad. So, hey, why report something that could make us look bad? Amtrak is warning of 2,400 possible layoffs. The Philadelphia Inquirer is selling their printing facility and planning on laying off 500 plant employees. Even though we're in the midst of a global pandemic, health insurers are still struggling. Mount Lake Terrace-based health insurer Primera Cuts is cutting 285 jobs. Here is 250 Lake Charles medical workers being laid off because of Hurricane Laura.